Good afternoon, and welcome to the Maryland and Delaware edition of our webinar series exploring state findings from American Farmland Trust's Farms Under Threat 2040, Choosing an Abundant Future. Here's our agenda for the next hour and a little bit more together. And before we get started, let me run through some quick logistics. Everyone's been muted, so no need to worry about the barking dog or other noise you might have in the background. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, you can do so going to the control panel. If you look to the right-hand side, you'll see a little orange arrow at the top. If you click on that, that shrinks and expands the control panel. So if it's disappeared, click on the orange arrow, it'll come back. In that control panel, you'll see a questions tab. And if you go to the far right side of that, you see a little square with an arrow coming out of it. If you click on that square, the questions box pops out. You can type your question or comment in there. We will be getting to those at the end of the webinar. Notice also in the control panel that there's a thing that says handouts. In that handout section, there's a link to the full Farms Under Threat 2040 report, as well as the Delaware and the Maryland state summaries that we're going to be talking through a little bit later. Lastly, we are recording the webinar, so if you will get a link to the recording if you had registered for this webinar, please feel free to share this with anybody and everyone who you think might be interested in the findings. So let me now introduce myself and my co-host. I'm Chris Coffin. I wear two hats at American Farmland Trust. I direct the National Agricultural Land Network that is hosting this webinar series. We are an information and peer learning network for those who are engaged in trying to save farmland. That could be land trusts, state and county planners, folks who run farmland protection programs, which we have two of them today that we're excited to have Jimmy and Michelle with us. It is free. We hope everybody will consider joining it, and I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. And now let me introduce Amanda Cather. Amanda is our Mid-Atlantic Program Manager. Amanda hails from Montgomery County, Maryland, and is also a part-time farmer. Very excited. Let me talk for a minute about American Farmland Trust, for those of you who may not be knowledgeable about us. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. Some know us best by our bumper sticker, No Farms, No Food. We had a bumper sticker before this one, though, that said, "It's not farmland without farmers." We understand agriculture and we take a holistic approach to agriculture. Our national initiatives and our regional programs focus not just on protecting the agricultural land base, but also on the practices being used on the land and on the farmers and ranchers who work the land, whether those are the current farmers and ranchers and landowners or those into the future. Our programs and our research inform our state and federal policy advocacy and analysis, of which we do quite a bit. We work from farm fields and kitchen tables to the halls of state capitals and Congress, with 6 regional offices and a national office located in Washington, D.C. And I should say we are also the only national agricultural land trust. So let me now turn it over to Amanda to introduce our special guests.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. We'd like to recognize and thank USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service for their partnership and financial support of our Farms Under Threat research. Farms Under Threat is AFT's multi-year initiative to document the status of and threats to America's agricultural land base. NRCS has been invaluable to this entire research project, as has our research partner, Conservation Science Partners. For this report, we also collaborated with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And now I'm pleased to introduce 2 special guests we have with us this afternoon. Jimmy Croon has served in several roles at the Delaware Department of Agriculture since 2003. He currently manages the Delaware Agricultural Lands Preservation Program, which holds over 145,000 acres of permanently preserved farm easements, and is one of a handful of NRCS certified entities in the ACEP program nationwide. In addition, Jimmy oversees the administration of the department, including the agency's daily operations, annual budget, and technology initiatives. Jimmy's prior experience at the department includes apiary inspection, pest detection of crop, nursery stock, and forest pests, coordinating GIS projects for farmland preservation and other programs, and supporting wildland fire response in Western states as a GIS specialist. Jimmy lives in Felton, Delaware, and holds degrees in biology and environmental science from University of Maine at Machias, and a master's degree in geographic information systems from Penn State. Hi, Jimmy. Thank you for being with us. Michelle Cable was appointed the executive director of the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation in 2018. She joined the MALP program as an administrator in 2011, where she managed easement applications, stewardship and compliance matters, general inquiries, and requests from landowners. And before joining MALP, she was a director of protection for the Georgia chapter of the Nature Conservancy, leading their team in real estate transactions for 5 years. Prior to that, she worked for the Maryland Rural Legacy Program at the Department of Natural Resources for 6 years. That's another state-funded easement acquisition program. So your roots go way back in this work. She received a Master's of Environmental Management from Duke University in 2000 and a Bachelor of Arts degrees from Wake Forest University in 1996. Michelle is a lifelong equestrian and currently owns 1 horse. So thank you both so much for being here with us. You've both had a chance to review the summary findings from the report, and I'm going to ask you a few questions about those. Michelle, what struck you most about the findings?
So first of all, thank you for inviting us to be here and doing this. It's great work that AFT does, and I'm always happy to help support it and learn with you all what you provide. So some of the things that really struck me when I reviewed the Maryland one and the larger report is just kind of where we are, not only as a state, a country, but a planet of like how many people, we're 8 billion people today, projected to be over 9 billion people 2040, what this report is. And there's already so many challenges with feeding the people. How are we going to solve this? How are we going to continue as a country, as a world? And this really focuses on the land preservation aspect, obviously, of farmland. For Maryland, our legislature set a goal of protecting 1,030,000 acres by the year 2030. And that is essentially half of all of Maryland's farmland. We have about 2 million acres of farmland. So our farmland is about 16% of Maryland as a whole. So our goal is only 8% of the state. So that doesn't really seem like a whole lot, but it is a whole lot for our state. And when you look at where we are, we're at about 83% of that goal. We have about 140,000 acres left to reach that goal. And looking through this report, that number is awfully close to the same number when you look at the scenarios of the 3 build-outs of what could be protected through that Built Better Cities aspect. And it really struck me how close that number was of what our goal was and what this 2040 goal of, if you do the best, the Build Better Cities would be almost identical to each other. So that's something that really struck me, as well as thinking about the different aspects of where to go and the smart growth focus of it. And the thing that struck me differently than it has in the past is really how we're always focusing on the agricultural land, the rural land. But to be able to do this and have these Build Better Cities, we need to get more involved in the urban side. If there aren't good and attractive cities to have this high density development in, it's never going to be successful. And that kind of struck me a little more so this time than reading anything like this in the past. So that's kind of my initial take on that. So it's really interesting. Lots to learn.
As we continue to learn from you all, for sure. So thank you again. Jimmy, what about you?
So I think it's really great to have analysis and data like this. I think when we think of farmland loss, it tends to be either in the past or current events, development that's happening right now. And it's really eye-opening to see the amount of change that could happen, looking into the future and what we can actually prevent. So I think on a similar line to Michelle, I was looking at, our potential to save 44,000 acres through different development trends. And just to put that in perspective, we just announced our latest round of preservation easements, which is around 4,000 acres. So that's the equivalent of us being able to preserve an extra 50% on top of what we're already doing every year without spending another dime in actual easement money. Or to put it another way, 44,000 acres is almost 10% of our statewide farmland. We have about 500,000 acres statewide. So I mean, that's a really considerable portion, and something that could be done without having to spend. I mean, we probably spend money in other ways, but without having to spend extra money on farmland preservation. I was also happy to see AFT looking at solar development. I think, of course, we're a Department of Agriculture. We love food and farmers, but we recognize that housing and energy are both also critical human needs, and we need to be able to meet all three without sacrificing one, especially since of the three, farming tends to be the less profitable one at least in terms of the amount of money you can get per acre of land. So, and they all compete for that same resource, which is unfortunate, but something we need to work on.
Jimmy, how do you think this Farms Under Threat research can be used by folks on this webinar to help save farmland?
Well, I really hope that people will. I love facts and statistics, and there are a lot of them in here. So I really hope that people will dig through and find some statistics that really speak to them, and then go to their local elected officials and government leaders and kind of bring up the fact that we need to change how development trends are working so that they so that there's less threat to farming, because it's a valuable resource. It literally feeds everybody and puts food on the table. And those kind of changes really happen at the local level. We at the state, even, not just Department of Agriculture, but other agencies, we don't have much ability to control development at the local level. That is mostly state or county governments especially through their comprehensive plans, and city governments in
Thank you. Michelle, what would you say about that?
So Jimmy and I definitely are on the same page about lots of different things, but I also I am that big believer, having that fact of the believer, information being the cornerstone of any success. So having this information, having these studies, and having real numbers associated with these different types of projections gives us a place to start or continue conversations with people from all walks of life. Sharing them with the farmers about how their choices can impact more than themselves. Sharing it obviously with the policymakers, how they can make informed decisions regarding laws, policies, zonings, etc. And then sharing them with your kind of non-ag everyday, your cousins, your neighbors, your people that may not necessarily think about this, but how we can help them understand how their living arrangements, where they live, how they commute, what they do, really has a bigger impact on not just their little bubble, but the whole state's or country's environmental and agricultural economy and way of life. So I think kind of having those facts, STEM conversations is a real key.
This is our constant car conversation as we're driving, actually, with my kids. So yes, we're also on the same page. They get a little tired of me, but Michelle, you all are already doing so much to preserve farmland in Maryland, but the threat is still really significant. What steps would you like to see? And you guys have both talked about the importance of local governments. What steps would you like to see state or local governments, or even the federal government, take to reduce conversion of farmland?
So I kind of latched onto something that Jimmy already said about what's been provided in this report is the solar siting aspect. And I feel like from what I've seen over the last, decade, and looking kind of into the crystal ball, there seems to be more and more of a competing nature of solar projects, solar sites, and active farmland that can truly be more, productive land and not just different types of niche farming. And I think there needs to be some type of more efforts at, state or federal level, almost even more than local, of really giving the priority focus of research of having truly those agrivoltaic operations where you can have truly productive agricultural land and truly effective solar facilities, and it's not one or the other. And I think that is, I know there are places in Europe doing a lot of research on this. I do not hear much about it in the United States at all. And I feel like that is a place where government could really put their weight and put their money behind on the research side to have a solution where it's truly compatible and not competitive.
Jimmy, what about in Delaware?
So I think I can add to that idea. Michelle and I talk about this stuff all the time, so it's no wonder we're thinking similar things. But we're talking about development. I think one, aside from maybe changing comprehensive plans, one of the key aspects people need to remember is that farming needs to be profitable, and we need to look at policies that'll make it easier to get into farming, easier to get land if you're interested in farming, and make it more profitable to simply be a farmer. We hear from people all the time who are farming, and it's just getting more and more difficult. The costs are going up, and they're not getting the income that they need out of it. It's just their business after all, and that pushes them towards these decisions like selling the land to a developer or leasing it to a solar company for a 30-year lease. So, a lot of sometimes people, that's not what they want to do, but if it can be more profitable, then it'll help close that gap and help people decide to keep their land in farming and keep themselves in farming. You said there's no farms without farmers.
Well, thank you both so much. Those are really insightful and wise words for us. So I appreciate you all thinking about that and letting us know what you think. And I'm going to pass it back to Chris.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle and Jimmy. It is always a treat to get to talk to you about these things. Thank you, Amanda. We are now, all of us, going to go off camera so that all of you can see the charts and then the website in a slightly bigger version, which we hope will help. So we're going to now dig into the methodology and the findings from the report. The first two Farms Under Threat reports, Farms Under Threat, State of America's Farmland, which we released in 2018, and Farms Under Threat, State of the States, which we released in 2020, mapped past conversion of agricultural land, first looking from 1992 to 2012, and then 2001 to 2016. So in this report, we're actually looking forward, using past conversion data to model and predict future conversion of farm and ranch land out to 2040, and doing that at the state and county level. So we started with Farms of the Threat, State of the State data from 2001 to 2016. As a reminder, that analysis mapped conversion of land to two different types: urban and high density development, as well as low density residential development. So let's take a minute to talk about what we mean on those two, because it's kind of a continuum. Urban and highly developed conversion is the traditional culprit of farmland conversion. So it's been mapped, it's been tracked for a long time. It includes residential, industrial, and commercial areas typically found in and around cities and towns. It also includes rural industrial sites, so oil and gas infrastructure, as well as larger scale solar development. Basically, anything that can be identified by satellite remote sensing is being built up. Low density residential development has become a more pervasive culprit in the conversion world. And AFT has worked with conservation science partners to pioneer an approach to map and quantify the impacts of this type of development on the land base. So low density residential areas range from lower density subdivisions to larger farmettes and ranchettes. Typically, this kind of scattered large lot housing fragments the agricultural land base and makes production harder for the farms and ranches that remain. It's important to note that some agriculture can be found on this low density residential land. And in fact, many smaller farm parcels, as we know in this neck of the woods, especially those near urban centers, can be quite profitable. However, what our research has found is that once land has been converted to low density residential development, it is far more likely to be further converted to urban and highly developed land. So starting with our historical data, we projected into the future with the business as usual scenario. So we basically made a straight line projection using the same annual conversion rate as what we documented from 2001 to 2016 to predict both the level and the location of conversion out to 2040. We adjusted the model to account for projected population growth or decline. So building off of that scenario, we developed two alternative scenarios, which we'll get to in a minute. For each of the three scenarios, we also mapped the coastal flooding risk that is projected by sea level rise. Once we had the projections of conversion and the flooding risk, we quantified the effects of these scenarios, looking at both the agricultural land types converted, so would the conversion be on cropland or pasture land or rangeland, as well as on the quality of the land using some index around productivity, versatility, and resiliency values of the land that we created in the 2020 Farms Under Fed analysis. As with any modeling exercise, there are some caveats. Most importantly, as you see here, we were not able to account for local zoning. Land use regulations are inherently local and there is no national database of them. This means that our maps represent the general pattern and rough amount of conversion that is likely based on those historic conversion patterns. They don't reflect, though, what may be allowed or prohibited on the ground through those local land use regulations. Our modeling also does not include the impact of water scarcity and potential fallowing of land because of either water scarcity or salinization of existing water. Mapping this impact involves a complex interplay of a lot of variables and was simply beyond the scope of this analysis. You'll see in the web app, though, when we get there, that we did include a data overlay from World Resource Institute's Aqueduct, which offers some projections around water availability in the future. So let's look quickly at the three scenarios we modeled. Again, here, this business as usual, straight line projection from 2001 to 2016 data. The second scenario is what we call runaway sprawl. This envisions a scenario where sprawl actually gets worse, which we know it can do, in part because of high housing costs, especially in rural areas, and enhanced rural and remote work opportunities, which are only going to be more popular as rural broadband expands. We know that some parts of the country may already be on this runaway sprawl trajectory. And then lastly, we modeled the future that we hope for, better built cities. This scenario envisions successful efforts to reduce the footprint of residential, commercial, and industrial development on productive ag land. While this scenario still results in the conversion of some farmland, it envisions a future with vibrant, compact cities and towns and abundant farm and ranch land to meet the needs of the future. Sorry, hang on, I have lost where we are. Okay, a quick look at the assumptions that went into the scenarios. And again, you can see these. At business as usual, we used the historical rate. We adjusted for population growth. In runaway sprawl, we left the same rate of conversion for urban and high density development. We increased the rate of low density residential conversion by 50%, assuming again that this could be a worser case scenario. And then with better built cities, we took from that business as usual. We said, let's see if we can make that urban areas more dense by reducing the conversion rate by 25%, which we know is possible because it's been done in urban areas. And the rate of low density residential conversion, we reduced by 50%, thinking that it was a pretty ambitious but ultimately achievable model. So let's look at each scenario's potential impact. These gray areas, bars, show that from 2001 to 26, we converted 11 million acres of agriculture land. That's this century alone. Under business as usual or worse, runaway sprawl, we may see another 18 or even 24 million acres of farm and ranch land converted or threatened by conversion. Conversely, if we make smart choices about where and how we site future development, we could reduce that conversion of farm and ranch land to around 11 million acres. So you may be thinking 11 million acres is still a lot. Is that really best case? We appreciate the development, as Jimmy said, right, that we have the need for renewable energy development, we have the need for affordable housing, and we have the need for food production. While it may be possible for cities and towns to be even more compact in their growth, we chose what we believed to be ultimately a realistic scenario. These next two slides we hope are helpful in showing how Maryland and Delaware compare to other states. This one shows projected total acres converted by county. The darker the red or rust, whatever you want to call it, the more acres converted. Not surprisingly, you see the darkest colors out in the Southwest where there is a lot of total acreage. This next slide compares the percent of agricultural land in each county that is going to be projected to be converted. And you see here that it changes when you're looking at percent of land conversion as opposed to total acres. The East Coast really shows where a lot of this conversion is going to eat up a significant percent of every county's agricultural land. Another key finding relates to the impacts on our I'm sorry, I forgot this slide. Here we're looking at a different way of looking at Delaware and Maryland, and you can see here that these percentages are concerning, as both Jimmy and Michelle spoke to. In Maryland, potential percent of agricultural land that could be converted is nearly 8%, and in Delaware, it's 12.5%. These are not lists that you want to be on, and so trying to get these percents down is what we hope everybody will work towards. Another key finding relates to the impacts on our very best agricultural land. For previous reports, AFT created the first ever index of agricultural land quality that looked at the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of land, or what we called the PVR values. Land over a certain PVR threshold is considered nationally significant land, land which is best suited for long-term cultivation and food production. While this land is concentrated in certain parts of the country, every state has some nationally significant land, and you can actually see quite a bit of it, as you all know, in Maryland and Delaware. The loss of this land is especially concerning. This is land that can produce the highest yields of crops and livestock with the least environmental impacts. Our modeling shows that nearly half of the projected conversion will occur on nationally significant land, even though that type of land represents only 38% of the country's farm and ranch land. The more nationally significant land converted, the more reliant we become on marginal land for food production. To put this potential loss of 9 million acres of nationally significant land in perspective, the total acreage of land in the U.S. devoted to fruit, nut, and vegetable production is just 10.4 million acres of land. And I think from there, I am now turning it over to Amanda to go through the next few slides.
Thanks, Chris. The next finding we want to highlight relates to coastal flooding as a result of projected sea level rise. We mapped what this might look like in 2040 based on 7.5 inches of additional sea level rise. We found that 450,000 acres of farmland and ranchland could be flooded by 2040, including 3,600 acres in Maryland and 1,600 acres in Delaware. This number doesn't include salinization of soils and groundwater, which will jeopardize many more acres even before land is inundated. Additionally, we found that nearly 500,000 acres of existing UHD and LDR land will be flooded nationally, causing some residents to seek more stable housing. And the result there will be another 2.7 million acres of ag land nationally could be converted to development. One of the other threats we're highlighting with this report is the threat that solar development poses to agricultural land, and Jimmy and Michelle both touched on this earlier. To be clear, American Farmland Trust supports renewable energy development. However, we think it's essential that we plan carefully so that our most productive, versatile, and resilient land is not compromised. We also think it's possible for agriculture and solar to coexist in mutually beneficial ways. This map shows the projected acres of utility-scale solar photovoltaics energy generation facilities by state in 2040. This data comes from the Decarbonization with Electrification scenario of the U.S. Department of Energy's Solar Future Study. That study estimates that there will need to be 7.4 million acres of utility-scale solar in place by 2040 to meet the Biden administration's energy goal. And you can see, again, here, both Maryland and Delaware are in the kind of medium to dark purple on projected acres, even though they're very small states. The next slide shows the percent of undeveloped land projected to be used for solar development based on that same DOE Solar Future Study. And here again, you can see Maryland and Delaware in the very dark purple on percent of agricultural land. We did model conversion of land to solar development, but we didn't include that data layer in this report because of some issues with the data. There is enough information about the solar modeling results in our solar technical paper that will be available through the Farmland Information Center. We'll also be releasing a solar white paper later this year. The most important projections in that paper were that if current trends continue, 83% of the projected solar development by 2040 will be sited on agricultural land, and nearly half of projected solar will be sited on nationally significant land. So we're now going to dive into the data available for Maryland and Delaware on the interactive website. And for this, we're going to be joined by our colleague, Beth Frazier, who will also be our navigator. So thanks, Beth, and I'm going to hand it back to Chris.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. Okay, so let's dive in here to what you see when you go to the website. And I believe that Beth has put in or will put in the direct link to this website in the chat. So you get to the cover as you get to this summary page, what we did, what we found, very top line version. To get out of this, you simply click out it on the upper right. If you want to get back to it, on the upper right-hand corner of the website, you see About, and that will take you right back to it. Let's look at that upper right-hand corner for a minute. You'll also see How To tab up there. That takes you to a 5-minute video that explains how to use the various data layers in the scenarios. And while we're talking about data layers, you can see up there on the right-hand side, there is a Request Data tab. You can actually click on that to request any of the data layers, and this is how you would go about doing it. So please feel free to be asking for some of that data. And then lastly, the View Report tab up there takes you to our Farmland Information Center, where you can find the full report, the executive summaries, past reports, the white papers that and technical papers that Amanda just referenced around solar as they become available. So with that, Beth is now going to take us to Maryland. And so all you do is you find Maryland. When you click on it, it will automatically give you the state level information there on the left, as well as the county level information for wherever you happen to have your cursor when you clicked on Maryland. So let's talk about what's on this page. Seeing here, you see that in terms of Maryland, under the business as usual, right, 178,000 acres potentially converted. Again, on a worser case, Runaway Sprawl, almost 250,000 acres. And with better choices, it could be, sort of closer to slightly under 100,000 acres. You can see again for each county that same level of county level data is available. And again, the darker are the urban and highly developed conversion numbers. The lighter orange are the low density residential. Going on down on this page, you can see what the acres of conversion look in terms of type of both type of land. So you see here cropland, pasture land, woodland. Most, in the case of Maryland, most of that conversion is going to cropland with smaller amounts to pasture land and woodland. A note on the woodland that is only woods associated with a farm. It is not all forest land. We came up with a modeling technique on the woodland in the last Farms Under Threat analysis, and we're using this on the future projections as well. If you look right above that, looking at what of Maryland's best agricultural land would be projected to be converted, again, this is land that we consider to be the highest quality land in the state, and it is fairly significant, as you can see, almost 100,000 acres of Maryland's best land. Looking down, just one last piece on it is that the point we were making earlier, that low density residential development paves the way for further development. You can see for Maryland here that land that was in low density residential in 2016 is 7 times more likely to be converted to urban development by 2040 compared to other types of ag land in the state. With that, let's go back up. Let me show you the state summaries that can be found. Again, they are also in the handout section, but you can click right on that. It takes you to this nifty 2-pager that we hope that you will use for your work. You use it to inform your members if you are with a membership organization, or to inform your county officials or state officials there, or reporters. There are many possible uses for this, and we hope you will do that. Again, it goes through some of the same data, 180 to 178,000 acres of farmland that could be fragmented or compromised statewide. What we also did was to put that in context of what that might mean in terms of farms and economic output and jobs. And you see here that based on that 178,000 acre projected conversion, that is the likely loss of 1,400 farms, 144 million in farm output, and 3,200 jobs associated in the agriculture industry. These are numbers that are all derived from the 2017 Census of Agriculture. And if you look here then further on the right-hand side, the hardest hit counties, ones where projected conversion is the highest, are Frederick County, Howard, and Montgomery. And so with that, and as you see, this is sort of other detailed information. Again, we hope you will find these useful. But with that, we're going to stop because we are going to do now a cruise at the county level. And we are going to cover, I'm not sure whether we're going to Maryland first or Delaware first, but we don't want to ignore Delaware, so we will get to Delaware. So back to you, Amanda.
Thanks, Chris. We are definitely going to go to Delaware first. Beth, if you can click on, we're going to actually go to Kent County. And as Chris pointed out, the state report, maybe Beth, just look at the state report for Delaware really quickly, if we can. The state report, because it does highlight the 3 most threatened counties, Delaware has 3 counties, and they are all on the most threatened list. So there you can see that, yep, the state overall. So we're going to look at Kent County, which is the county right in the middle of Delaware. And Beth, if you could, on the left, use the drop-down menu to select Runaway Sprawl. So this will show us the scenario in Runaway Sprawl on the left. On the right-hand side, we'll choose Better Built Cities. And we can really see here the difference between, and if we zoom in, we can even see the urban and high density development and the low density residential development in the different colors under Runaway Sprawl on the left and Better Built Cities on the right. And as Chris mentioned, we don't really, because of the way the model works, we're not kind of assuming that this development will happen on these specific parcels in Kent County, but just you can definitely see the stark difference between the left hand and the right hand vision of what Kent County could look at. You can also see the dark blue indicating sea level rise in this map as well. So let's go back to Maryland for a minute, and we will take a look at Montgomery County, also on that list of the 3 most threatened counties, and my home county. Here in Montgomery, again, if we look, we take the drop-down menu on the left-hand side and choose Runaway Sprawl. And on the right-hand side, we have Better Built Cities. And again, we can really see the difference here. On the left hand, in the western part of the county, we're also looking at Montgomery County's 93,000 acre agricultural reserve. Then that's an area of the county where forward-thinking planning preserved land for agricultural use through zoning and transfer of development rights. And AFT was a part of that, the development of that agricultural reserve. So we can really see the ways in which planning can have an impact even today and into the future on these models, but also recognizing that despite the ag reserve and that forward-thinking planning, Montgomery County still remains among the 3 most threatened counties in the state. And again, seeing that really stark difference between the Runaway Sprawl on the left and Better Built Cities on the right. And you know, again, Montgomery County is one of these counties where affordable housing and renewable energy are such critically important issues, and any efforts that we use to preserve agricultural land have to keep all of that in mind too. Beth, let's look on the eastern shore of Maryland at Dorchester County. If we can go over across the bay and a little bit south. There we go. There's Dorchester. And again, on the left-hand side, we can see Runaway Sprawl, and on the right, Better Built Cities. And what I really want us to notice here is if we select a standard view, so up on the top there, we can look at different views. And this standard view really shows the sea level rise in really stark contrast in this dark blue. There's a lot of, that shows that sea level rise data layer very clearly in that standard view. And again, across the state, the difference there, you can really see the orange layers and the russet colored layers. So thank you, Beth. And while we're in the website, I also want to mention a piece of research related to farmland protection. To show the relationship between compact growth and farmland protection, we modeled what it would look like to add a substantial increase in permanent farmland protection in selected metro areas across the US. Washington, DC was one of those areas. And of course, that metro area has significant impact on areas of Maryland bordering DC. So you can access the maps that were produced for this thought exercise through this drop-down menu that Beth is showing us. And unfortunately, we don't have time today to explore this data layer in detail, but the intent is to show how the conversion pattern might change if 10% of the ag land base, or about 86,500 acres, was protected in the DC area. And this modeling might be helpful in guiding future investment in the state PACE program. You can find a lot more information about this part of the Farms Under Threat research on pages 34 to 36 of the report. And now back to you, Chris.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you, Beth. So we're just going to take a couple of minutes to talk now about action. What can each of us do in our work to help choose an abundant future? And before I talk through this next slide, let me say that if people have questions or comments, again, please do put them in the chat. We have Michelle and Jimmy who are happy to engage in further conversations. So if you have questions for any of us, please feel free to put them in now. But let's look at these policy recommendations. So we have policy recommendations in each of these 4 categories and at every level of government. So if you are a county or a municipal official or a state legislator or a state agency employee or a congressional staffer, we hope you will find a recommendation in here that you might like to champion. Please let us know if we can provide you with any additional information about any of the policy ideas in the report. Similarly, if you're a farmer, a rancher, landowner, community advocate, we encourage you to share and discuss these recommendations with your elected and agency representatives and partners. But let me just highlight just a few of the things in each of these categories. So in the encouraging smart growth, right? Preaching smart growth strategies in Maryland is like preaching to the choir, and Delaware is incredibly close behind. Maryland has been a leader in incentivizing more urban compact development for decades, and both Maryland and Delaware have strong state planning offices. In both states, comprehensive plans are where the rubber meets the road, especially when it comes to promoting more infill development in smaller cities and rural communities. Engaging in the comprehensive plan process, the drafting, the review is critically important, and we hope that everybody who is on this webinar finds a way to engage in that at the local community level. Protecting agricultural land. Again, we are talking to 2 powerhouses in the land, agricultural land protection world, and we are tremendously proud of the work that Jimmy and Michelle and their colleagues and the taxpayers in those 2 states have put to agricultural land protection. Congress will be writing a new farm bill next year. An important program in that bill is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, which helps to fund the purchase of agricultural conservation easements from willing farmers and landowners. More funding for that program and some administrative modifications to it would help protect more farmland in both Maryland and Delaware. So just so that that's very important, and we hope folks will continue to be engaged in the Farm Bill process. We've talked a little bit about advancing smart solar siting. Local governments can ensure that best practices are followed when siting solar on farmland. So this is looks at construction of solar facilities, the operation of them, and the decommissioning to preserve soil health, water resources, and importantly, the ability for a farmer to farm the land during and after the life of the solar project. Additionally, as we talked about earlier, states can invest in additional research around agrivoltaics and provide incentives for agrivoltaic solar development. as we saw in the previous slide, solar siting is a significant driver of farmland loss in Maryland and Delaware, and it's going to be very important to create state and local policies that will help mitigate that loss in the very near future. And lastly, supporting farmland access. Here again, Maryland and Delaware have been leaders and innovators in this space and about thinking through the land needs of next generation farmers. Two examples are MARBIDCO's Next Generation Farmland Access Program and Delaware's Young Farmer Loan Program. What we feel are important complements to these types of programs, which we hope other states will look at, are technical assistance to both senior farmers and landowners, as well as young and new farm seekers. We know that technical assistance can help older farmers and landowners think through succession strategies and identify potential successors. And for farm seekers, having that individualized technical assistance can be critically important to help identify and assess specific land opportunities. So with that, now I'm going to turn it back to Amanda and a little bit to Jimmy and Michelle to talk more about planning for agriculture and addressing these issues in Delaware and Maryland.
Great. Again, thank you, Chris. Community planning, as we've definitely heard throughout the last hour, is critically important to smart growth. As part of this planning, AFT encourages communities to proactively plan for agriculture. And this involves these four basic principles that can work in tandem with efforts to plan for smarter, more compact development. We have a lot more resources on planning for agriculture on our Farmland Information Center website, and we hope that you'll check them out. I'm going to talk a little bit about work that AFT is doing in Maryland and Delaware, but before I do that, I'd love to ask Jimmy and Michelle if they have things they'd like to add about their vision for agricultural land preservation in their states going forward. You guys have already talked about some really ambitious goals that you have, but I'd love to, and you've talked about farm business vitality and about smart solar siting, and I'd love to hear what you have to add right now. You both have so much great work to be proud of. Jimmy, do you want to start?
Sure. One thing, we just heard, we have the Young Farmer Loan Program that we've had that program for almost, I think 13 years. It's a program that provides a 0% interest mortgage to help with land purchase for new young farmers. But what we've been talking about lately is that is probably one of the final steps on the way to becoming a farmer for somebody who's young and trying to get into farming. So been thinking about what other ways can we support, and I think that kind of technical support, the training, support new farmers that are on their way that aren't really ready to purchase land yet, but are kind of getting, moving on the way to get there. Another thing that we talk about a lot is right to farm, either legislation or policy changes, and I think that ties into the profitability and the success of farming as an endeavor. Where when I look at new developments that are in rural areas, I kind of think about it like habitat loss, where you get a lot of edge effects. Anywhere where there's a farm next to, especially a residential community, you have that edge. And we see a lot of conflicts from the new residential homeowners who are right on that edge with farmland, whether it's irrigation or pesticide or dust or whatever kind of conflicts are created. And so that ties into the idea that residential development needs to be more compact, so we get less edge effect and more farming in the areas that should be set aside for farming, and residential development in those areas. And so those are a couple things that we've been talking a lot about. I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Jimmy, I think you've as I said before, a lot of what we have to share is similar. I think some different things to touch on that Jimmy hadn't shared yet. A couple of ideas. You know, one of our previous chairmen from our the board of trustees that works with our program has always said, you know, these agricultural land preservation programs or other types of conservation easement programs, but specifically for farmland, it's like we're saving the farm, but we need the farmers, you know, and so having these programs that are available for those new people coming into the industry is really important to keep it viable and going into the future. You know, this report itself talked about the aging population and what that generational change is going to look like percentage-wise, you know, in these next couple decades, and it's pretty staggering. So that's definitely something to continue to focus on. And one of the things that I have always talked about more on the easement side of things is how do we keep, you know, our existing, you know, 300+ thousand acres and just in our MOUth program, conservation easements can be very challenging, especially for these working lands in this agriculture industry. How do you have a perpetual easement in an ever-changing industry? And making sure that what we do doesn't, you know, the easements that we create and that we then steward and enforce have enough flexibility to be able to allow the agricultural industry and operations to evolve. And so having a perpetual easement in an ever-changing industry, there's that real fine, you know, kind of gray area of how do we get it right? And that's something I think we're always trying to learn and grow from. You know, unfortunately, a lot of what we do, both, you know, the planners, government, us here, is you're learning from what has happened. You know, what type of scenarios have occurred, what type of requests are happened, where do you see things, where has the industry changed and evolved, and how can we grow with it? And it's really hard to be forward thinking in that, you know, you get your magic crystal ball out, what do you need to change for the future, where it's really reacting from the past. And so having that flexibility in there really is key to a successful easement program that is perpetual. So that's one challenge I know that we're pretty cognizant of, thinking for just our easement program, but as well as for the agriculture industry as a whole.
Thanks to both of you. I think it's really clear from what we've heard today that Maryland and Delaware are deeply thoughtful national leaders in supporting farmers, promoting conservation practices on preserved land and non-preserved land, and preserving farmland. And AFT is really pleased to both support their work within their states and also to spread the gospel of Maryland and Delaware to other regions. American Farmland Trust works with a number of partners in Maryland, including MOUth, Lower Shore Land Trust, Eastern Shore Land Conservancy, and the Cecil Land Trust to encourage soil health practices on protected farmland through our Soil Health Stewards program. We also know that our partner, the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy, is leading a collaborative effort called Delmarva Oasis to preserve 50% of the Delmarva Peninsula by 2030. We also are excited to be working with Jimmy, along with Marbidco in Maryland, on our Farms for a New Generation program, which is work on land access. And AFT has also run a number of Women for the Land learning circles in Maryland, aimed at helping women farmers and non-operating landowners adopt conservation practices across the state. So we are very excited to continue and to grow and build our work in these two states to conserve farmland and support farmers in all the ways that you've talked about, working in partnership with the incredible work that's already happening on the ground. Back to you, Chris.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now we do have a few questions. If people have other questions, please do feel free to add them. Again, you pop out that little questions piece of the control panel by clicking on that little square on the right-hand side. So here's, and I guess we should all go back on camera, since now we will be talking with each other. So here are the questions, and they're well, let me start with this one. So this is one I can answer, which is, do your projections take into account farmland which is already permanently protected? Excellent question. The answer is yes. So we have been in the process of developing what we call a protected agricultural land database, or the PALD, as we are dubbing it. We're not really good at very good acronyms. PALD, urban and high density, we don't have any good acronyms. I wish that we did. Anyway, the PALD data layer was incorporated in this conversion analysis. We did not include it, again, when you look at the legend in this mapping, we did not include that data layer, in part, again, because zooming in with specificity, there's that sort of issue around, how sort of showing exactly where protected land is. So it is not included, but it is included in the analysis, so that, again, presumably you are not going to see land that is projected for development on protected farmland. That being said, again, it is a model. There are always limitations with models, particularly at the parcel specific level. We would not encourage folks to use this for that purpose at the parcel level. It's really intended to be a sort of model of expected conversion, sort of generally where that is. But that's a long way of saying, yes, the projections did include accounting for permanently protected farmland. The second question is about the definition of agricultural land. The questioner says, poultry is a major piece of our ag economy in Delaware. Is that land use counted in your ag lands acreage? And again, I assume yes, it is, that we have looked at when we did the agricultural land base, which we have done in those prior two farms under threat analyses, that we took some spatial data, national land use, land cover, additional other things to identify where the agricultural land is. We consider poultry to be agricultural use, and so yes, that land would be considered in the ag land acreage. And then the last question, and maybe this I think I would direct to Jimmy and Michelle, which is, are folks familiar, because I'm interested in whether you all have used them or know of folks in your states who have used them. Are folks familiar with the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which can be used to provide low interest rate loans for both implementing conservation and purchasing land? And then the website that was given here was an EPA website /Pennsylvania. So I'm going to guess that maybe it's been used successfully in Pennsylvania. I'm not very familiar. Maybe, again, I'm sorry, Amanda, I didn't mean to leave you out of the question. But if any of the three of you know of any experience of having used that, I would be interested in your thoughts.
So I'm not familiar with that specifically. We have a Chesapeake Bay revolving fund that I wonder if it's similar
right.
to that same. Is that what you have, Jimmy, too?
Yeah, we have a new state clean water revolving fund that I think was initially funded last year, and we haven't used it for that purpose yet. So.
Yeah, we haven't used it for land preservation purposes. It's usually for the fund that I'm thinking of is more for smaller projects like stream or wetland restoration types of projects that are more for water quality improvements rather than like landscape scale land preservation.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions. So, but that's interesting. Thank you to the person who asked about the state revolving fund, because it will cause us to go back and provide a little more information, learn a little bit more about its possibility for use in purchasing land and or easements. So thank you for that. So I think unless there are any other questions, or unless Jimmy and Michelle, you have any other thoughts, we're going to start to wrap up, but let me stop and see either Jimmy or Michelle if you have any other thoughts that you would like to offer before we wrap up.
Not me.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's do this. You see here, with this last little bit of information, we just want to plug a couple of AFT resources. Obviously, there's a wealth of information in all of American Farmland Trust, the Mid-Atlantic office with Amanda and her colleague Jamie Mira are wonderful resources for those of you in Maryland and Delaware. We encourage you to reach out to them if you have specific questions, thoughts around our work in Maryland and Delaware. Our farmland.org website with American Farmland Trust, you can go there to learn more about what we as an organization are doing as a whole. These two resources, though, on your screen, though, I want to talk to for 1 minute. The Farmland Information Center is a national clearinghouse that we run in coordination and cooperation with USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. It is an information hotline that is available for landowners, for producers, for policymakers, for academics. We have a lot of reference materials in that center on research, particularly research that makes the case for farmland protection. We have a lot of state policy analysis, a lot of information around programs. If you're looking for information about either the Marbidco program or the Delaware Young Farmer Loan Program, we have both of those on the Farmland Information Center. If you are a landowner, again, there is information there for you. What is an agricultural conservation easement? What are right to farm laws? Many other things that folks might find helpful. How do you write a lease with conservation provisions in them? Again, this kind of useful information that we hope people will check out. There's a phone number. They actually answer the phone, so please do give a call or send in a request if you have a request for information. And then lastly, a shameless plug for the National Agricultural Land Network. We are only a couple of years old. We are looking to expand the support and the technical information and the networking needed for all of us to get better at what we do and to be able to do more of what we do around saving farmland, whether that is permanently or it is less than permanently through planning and zoning and lots of other different techniques. So if you are a researcher or in a nonprofit or a planner, please do consider joining us. Importantly, it's very free, which is always a plus. So with that, let me turn it back to you, Amanda, to close us out.
Great. Thank you, Chris, and thanks to everyone who joined us today, and especially to our special guests, Jimmy Kroon and Michelle Cable. We are very grateful to both of you, and we hope that all of you who are listening today don't hesitate to reach out to me or our Mid-Atlantic Regional Director, Jamie Mira, anytime. We are really looking forward to continuing and building our work with our incredible partners in Maryland and Delaware towards an abundant future.
Great. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Stay cool.
Thanks, everyone.